Well, welcome. I am Doug Bland. I'm Executive Director for Arizona Interfaith Power and Light, which is a spiritual response to the climate crisis. And I'm here today with Miriam Robles, who is uh, the organizer, environmental organizer for Mi Familia Vota. So welcome, Miriam. Glad
Hi.
to have you join us.
Hi, thank you for having me.
I'll say a little bit about what this process is. It's a series of interviews that we're doing with movers and shakers in our community and on different topics. All of them have to do with getting us ready for a very, very important vote in November. We think that it's crucial both for the future of democracy and also for the future of our planet. And I put in the chat box a couple links that you might look at to prepare for the vote in November. And the primaries are coming up tomorrow, this week. So we hope you're registered for that. And if not, we are really encouraging you to register for the November vote. But I put a couple links up. One of them is a link about what we're calling a faith, values, climate voter guide. And we're encouraging people to vote and to vote with climate in mind. And then the values guide you can download, and it covers a number of different topics, including the one that we're talking about today, democracy and voting with Miriam. Other topics include racial justice and including LGBTQ people with dignity and climate justice, creation care, a number of different values that we think are really essential as we consider how we're going to move forward with our democracy and how we're going to vote. You can use these for your individual reflection. You can also use it for group discussion. If you're part of a small group, probably Zoom, virtual these days. But Miriam, so glad to have you here with us today. And I'd like to start just by asking you to tell us a little bit about the organization that you work for, Mi Familia Vota, and what you do.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Doug. And also thank you for the guide. I have downloaded it and I'm looking very forward to reading it and looking through it. Um, but Mi Familia Vota is a nonprofit organization that was established about 20 years ago. We operate in a few different states that have a dense Latino population, like California, Nevada, New Mexico, Florida, and Arizona. And our priority when we first began was making sure that underrepresented groups such as the Latino population in these particular states were able to have the same resources when it came to participating in democracy that their counterparts or their non-Latino counterparts were able to, because we saw there was a significant need for that and to be able to provide resources in both English and Spanish to these populations. And as time progressed, we expanded our scope to include other political aspects. So for example, I'm in the environmental justice program, but we also do a lot around citizenship and preparing people to get their citizenship, as well as like youth leadership development. And so we're growing and just increasing Latino engagement in the civic aspect, but also the political aspect.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Well, before I forget it, you mentioned that you're environmental organizer for Mi Familia Vota. What's the connection between voting and environmental care?
I mean, I would say the connection's pretty big, right? So if we are electing at any level, federal or local, elected officials who are acting with their conscience and acting with the environment in mind, because it is a climate crisis and it is something that if we do not address within the next few years, it's gonna, I mean, it's already negatively impacted us in ways that we can't regress, but it's gonna get to the point where it's gonna negatively impact the way future generations live, like, deeply. And I think it's something that we should be voting with in mind, and electing officials who are very conscious of that, because it seeps into pretty much every aspect of our life. Like, for example, with COVID, individuals who have worse air quality or who live in areas with worse air quality because of pollution have more have more more serious symptoms as to those who live in cleaner air areas.
Mhm. It seems like that trope, "I can't breathe," gets
Mm-hmm.
repeated again and again in so many different ways. Bad air, people have asthma, or injustice, a police officer's knee on someone's throat, "I can't breathe," or COVID-19, people in the hospital, especially impacted people of color in the hospital more often than others. So again, "I can't breathe."
Yeah.
Say a little bit, if you would. You're working to register people to vote and get them out to vote. What are some of the obstacles that you find for helping people, especially in the Latinx community,
Mm-hmm.
uh, to uh, to register to vote and to vote?
Yeah, no, great question. So I think particularly in this election cycle, one of the struggles that we've run into has been the fact that we can't be on the field. I think, if we're mobilizing digitally, a lot of the people who we are trying to mobilize are not super active in the digital sphere. So they're less able to be, to trust someone who's trying to register them to vote. Because when you register someone to vote, you need a certain amount of, personal information that someone shouldn't be giving out to anybody. And so one of the issues that we saw originally when registering people to vote is that, the Latinx community isn't always present online, and they aren't always super trusting, because you have a lot of these ideas, especially in Arizona with things like SB 1070, where people can be, if, for example, if someone came from a mixed status family, they don't like giving out information because, let's say their father's undocumented. So they
Mhm.
rather avoid any sort of engagement in that aspect, just to keep their family safe and at risk, or from risk. And then a lot of the issues too is that voters aren't always don't have the information available to them as to, education as to what kind of issues are being presented on the ballot. What does each position that is up for election, what do they do? All of that is vastly under presented in our communities, especially for the individuals who prefer that information in Spanish, or who have a better understanding of it in Spanish. So those are some of the issues that we run into. And a lot of the times, even with voting, some of the issues we run into is that it's not always accessible to our Latino populations, especially in like very dense areas where there's a lot of Latinos. We see that there isn't always like polling locations placed there. And we also see that if they are, they're pretty out of reach, or they're not as open as other locations. So it's a struggle pretty much throughout, from registration to voting day. We see a lot of obstacles that we're trying to consolidate.
Mhm. Good, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So let's back up a little bit from the work you're doing with Mi Familia Vota and hear a little bit about your story. What
Yeah.
what has led you to this work that you're doing today, to register people to vote, to get the Latinx community out and informed about the issues?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So, this has been something that's been very close to my heart, because I am a DACA recipient. So I personally cannot vote, uh, but I see a lot of people who have the ability to vote and aren't always, or do not jump at the opportunity. and they see it more as a chore as opposed to an ability to express how they feel about their elected officials and the laws that are being passed. So I came to the United States around 3 years old with my mother. My father was already here. He was part of the migrant worker programs that were circulating back in the 90s. I came around 1998, so I was about 3 years old. And I lived here for, I haven't gone back, so I've been here for 22 years now. And so it's been quite difficult for me and my family. My parents continue to be undocumented, and I have a brother and a sister. My brother is 18, so he actually gets to vote for the first time this year, which is really exciting for all of us. But being documented, I always had limited resources as to what I was able to do. So things like getting a job, college, all those things pretty much seemed impossible until DACA passed in 2012, and I was able to apply for these things. And so I was able to go to college and be the first person in my extended family to graduate from college, which was super exciting. And I felt really passionate about the issues that were impacting my community, especially after 2016, when Donald Trump was elected and we saw DACA being threatened, and it continues to be threatened to this day. I felt that because I couldn't vote, the best thing I could do was make sure other people could vote, and people could vote, and other people could vote with their conscience and be informed about the issues that they were voting about. So being able to work with Mi Familia Vota has been a really great way for me to be able to express that and to reach as many people as I can with my story. Because otherwise I think I would, be at the mercy of people who don't necessarily have the well-being of me and 600,000 other documented people in mind.
So it's a very personal issue for you, this idea
Yes.
of the right to vote. I wonder how you feel about those of us who might take that right for granted when it's something that you really value and long for.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think there's always this narrative of I know my rights is when people feel like their rights are being threatened for whatever reason. So I think even with the mask situation, where people feel like wearing masks has become a political issue, you hear that narrative thrown around a lot, like I know my rights, which is good that people do. But also I feel like people don't know their duties. It's never like I know my duties. It's never, the narrative isn't always about what one can do to better the society in which they live. So I feel like in order to be able to say things like I know my rights, you have to also participate in your civic duties as well.
Mm-hmm. So as advertised, this discussion has been on democracy and voting rights,
Mm-hmm.
but one of the other values in the Voter's Guide is how we treat immigrant neighbors with respect and consideration. So you are, somebody who embodies both those values that we think are so important as we approach this election. Of course, there's lots in Scripture that calls us to welcome the neighbor, usually with the phrase, for you were once sojourners or strangers in the land, and so you should also welcome those who are strangers. So in both the Hebrew Scriptures and in the Christian Scriptures, loving the neighbor and welcoming the stranger is very important. Often it was a life and death issue in the desert, as sometimes it is here as well. We see people trying to cross to escape oppression in countries and often risking their lives to do so. One of the things my church used to do was take water to the desert through Humane Borders and try to save lives that way. And now with the wall, they're having to go further and further into more and more dangerous areas of the desert. So from your personal experience, as a DACA person, maybe start off by telling us exactly what Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals is about, and a little bit of the political background of it.
Yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity, because I feel like it's not always something that is, everyone always throws around the acronym DACA, but there's a lot of nuance to it that isn't always recognized. So the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals was a bill passed, or not a bill, it was an executive order passed by President Obama back in 2012, which is heavily based off the Dreamers Act that was floating around Congress for, I think, like 10 years or so. But essentially what it is, it's gives individuals like myself who came to the United States really early on in their lives and pretty much have no recollection of their country of origin, or are not very connected to their country of origin, and who feel more, at home in the United States, an opportunity to stay here and work legally and contribute legally to, by taxes, by working at the front lines, which a lot of documented folks actually are doctors and things like that. But it is a 2-year permit that you have to apply for. It's pretty extensive, the application. You have to prove that you've been in the United States since 2007. So you have to provide any sort of evidence that you can possibly put together. And then you have to pay the fee, which is about $500. There's also a process in which you have to get your biometric scan. So they take your fingerprints, your pictures, all that sort of thing. And then you are able to work for 2 years. And in some states you can get a license. Here you can. You also pay taxes, you get a social security number, and then every 2 years you just do that again.
So it's not a cheap process to get recognized as a DACA recipient. $500, and think I read recently that the Trump administration has decided that it's not every 2 years now, that it may be every 1 year.
Right. So yeah, they're trying to get it pushed to 1 year. And I don't know if that's going to reflect in the fee. Based on the Trump administration's attitude towards DACA, it probably won't, to be honest with you. So we'll probably be paying $500 per year now instead of per every 2 years. Not to mention there's also legal fees. Sometimes you have to get a lawyer involved to help you, and there's fees involved there. But yeah, it's not an easy or cheap process to go through.
Mm-hmm. We hear all kinds of horror stories of children in cages and families separated. And what do you see that we might be able to do to sort of ameliorate those, what we consider to be atrocities, and treat the neighbor, the stranger, with more care and compassion?
Yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, I agree. I think those are atrocities that should be addressed. I think we've done a really good job of, I won't say ignoring it, but maybe minimizing those issues. And I think at the end of the day, politics and voting and any sort of civic engagement should come from a place of deep empathy and love of humanity and respect for the dignity of every human life. So the first thing we should do is participate in democracy with that in mind by voting. I think that's a very good first step, but by also just making sure that those stories aren't something that get pushed to the background, and it's something that we discuss and we talk about, and we don't become closed off to, desensitized to, because those are people's lives that we're seeing getting impacted.
Mm-hmm. It seems to me like when people are polled about dreamers in particular, DACA recipients, that there's a lot of sentiment of support. I mean, we hear some of the stories, like your own story, of going to college and contributing to our society in the way you do, and young people who serve in our military, who are dreamers as well. Um, Lots of support and empathy for dreamers going through, difficult time of uncertain status. Can you comment about, you said 600 and some thousand dreamers, DACA
Yeah.
people? Yeah. And what are they doing in our society, both for the good and the benefit of our society, and also, what are some of the struggles that DACA people have?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So a lot of these individuals, have graduated college like myself. A lot of them work actually in the healthcare field. So there's an idea that most documented folks are Latino, which, I mean, there is a good portion of us, but you could be pretty much from anywhere and be a DACA student. DACA students have been Rhodes Scholars, they have been doctors, they're on the front lines of the COVID epidemic. They have been, famous YouTubers. They essentially, I think, regardless of the accomplishments, at the end of the day, like I said, every human life deserves to be treated with dignity, and documented folks are not folks that are skirting responsibility or trying to, get a leg up on anybody. We just want to contribute to, our communities. We want to be able to live unafraid and be able to participate, and we pay taxes, we go to schools, we're members of the community that sometimes people don't even realize we're DACA. So it's something that I don't think you have to earn your documented status by being, some greatly accomplished human being, even though a lot of DACA folks are. I think at the end of the day, each person, has a level of human dignity, and all we're asking is for that to be respected for ourselves and our family members. So a lot of the struggles that we face there's the whole technical aspect of it, like we discussed, paying fees, finding a lawyer, especially now that most USCIS offices are closed. I know I had to recently renew my DACA, and it was very different because of COVID. So there's always those aspects that we face, but also just the general uncertainty of like what's going to happen. Like originally Donald Trump ended DACA in 2018, and we just got a decision from the Supreme Court this June. So between those 2 years, there's a lot of uncertainty that within our communities, within our families, just bouncing back and forth. And I think like when the Supreme Court decision first came out, someone asked me like, "Oh, so you can be a little bit more at peace now. You can, you can enjoy a little bit more peace and have that certainty that you aren't gonna get deported." I was like, "Well, I guess, but not really. Like we've always lived in an uncertainty and an anxiety and worrying about, our family members who aren't DACA, or just the fact that even if the Supreme Court ruled one way, as you mentioned, by the by the Trump administration's response to it, it doesn't mean that we are in any way safe."
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Miriam, for embodying in your life and your work two very crucial issues, we think, as we approach the election, both democracy and voting, and also the way we treat and respect with dignity the strangers in our midst, especially DACA students and dreamers. So we're dreaming with you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Any closing comments that you would make, something that I've not addressed with you that you think is really important?
Not necessarily something that wasn't addressed, but just something that I think should be addressed over and over and over again, that you and your organization have done a really good job about, which is it's important to vote with your conscience and with the respect for human life in mind, because a lot of the times that's not really taken into account. So I think it's important when voting and when participating in democracy in any scope, or just when you're approaching life in general, whether you're faith-based or not, to ask, am I treating every single human being that I come across or that I impact with the dignity and grace that deserves to be treated?
Beautifully said. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, blessings on you and your life and your family, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Of course, being on you and me as well, so thank you.